Hello, I'm Dr. Mark Odell, and welcome to the Master Series, where we talk about things related to counseling, Christianity, and culture, one, two, or all three. And I am delighted today to have as my co-conspirator, colleague, discussant, Joe Coco. Known Joe for, it's going to be 15, 18, a long time. Originally, Joe was the scoutmaster for my son's Boy Scout troop. And I've gotten to know Joe over the years and have found him to be a truly remarkable man. Just a little bio on him. He's probably going to have a hard time containing himself here, but he had a successful military career with the United States Marine Corps, served in combat, and then after that he went into a much more dangerous world, the financial services world, and worked for a couple of major firms. Eventually launching his own company, which became quite successful, and recently you have retired from.
That is true.
And we're going to want to hear a lot more about that. And then also, Joe and his wife are running a farm of sorts, which is not related to the financial services industry, but goats, chickens, you name it, Joe's likely to be doing it. And that really highlights something about him that I think is what's so remarkable. He lives an intentional life, and he is of all the men that I know, he's probably the exemplary Renaissance man across the board, because he can talk about just about anything. He's exceptionally well read. He can talk with wisdom and expertise about just about anything. He is extremely well read. He can talk about 5th century poetry from North Africa. He can talk about quasars. He can talk about brain surgery. He can talk about just about anything with a degree of familiarity that is quite remarkable. So thank you for your willingness to be here today.
Well, flattery will get you everywhere, Mark, but truth be known, my Achilles heel is anything that has to do with power tools. And anytime I'm around a workshop, I'm not allowed to be there without adult supervision. So those of us who can't do, we have opinions on things.
Well, you had a radio show for a number of
I
years.
did.
And so your opinions are always well-founded, in
Thank
my
you.
experience. So I was wondering if there was maybe a hole somewhere in the resume. And so now that you volunteered it, I also know that if you put your mind to it, you and YouTube and a couple of other people that you know could make you into a scratch carpenter, very likely.
I can probably squeak out some sort of utilitarian thing, but it won't be pretty.
Right. Well,
with a little fish glue and cat gut, I can probably string something together, but it won't be pretty.
Right. Well, sometimes function is more important than aesthetics, but we like them to go together. So today we're going to be talking about embracing retirement. And retirement is one of those marker events in life. There are several of them that we have in our culture. Graduating from high school, getting married, launching from parents, going to college, the first job. There are some other events that are more recent, getting a divorce, which that's unfortunate, but that's an increasingly common marker. But the thing about these markers is that there are usually rituals around them that help people move through the transition. And retirement has some of that as well, and we're going to be looking at some of that. But the main point about marker events and the transitions that they signify is that they bring stress. And the stress can be wonderful stress, like, hey, you just got married, isn't that terrific? Or in retirement's case, you don't have to go work anymore. You get to do whatever else is appealing to you, whatever you had on your mind, and that's good, but it might be a little bit like, so how do I actually make this work, and what are the other consequences of a transition of this size? But there's also sometimes a pretty good degree of negative stress, especially if someone's identity has been built so much into the function that they have served in a job, and now that's gone. They might really, really struggle. So you have just recently, as we said, kind of retired, and I hope that your example is one that is enlightening for folks who are going to be listening to our conversation today.
Years ago, I read Dennis Rainey's book, Stepping Up. It's a book it's a treatise on biblical manhood. And he talks about that we have these different stages in life. From a male perspective, you're a boy first, then you're an adolescent, then you're a man, then you're a leader, and then you're a patriarch. And I read that book about 15 years ago, and it really had an impact on me. And it helped me to focus on what the next stage of my life was going to be. And then it allowed me to start planning towards doing it well.
So that's where the intentionality of your life may have gotten an extra boost.
Yes. Specifically, transitioning from being a leader to being a patriarch is that I've seen very, very few people do that well. And many times when people are in positions of responsibility and they step down or retire, is that they go to the golf course or they start traveling exclusively or they watch a lot of Fox News. But there's a whole world out there where we have value because of our years of experience that we can share with other people. They're dying to hear it. We just have to make ourselves available. So I started seeing myself in my business as I hired associates. Now, when I did hire my associates, I hired them with the end in mind. When I hired Tom in 2011, I hired him knowing that I was going to retire at some time. So I hired him specifically knowing that he was going to be an owner in the business at some point in the future.
Did he know that too?
Eventually, yes. I actually had a buy-sell agreement after his second year. He went through a kind of an internship.
Probationary kind of period, right?
And then when it looked like he had the right stuff, I went and saw an attorney, and I actually wrote up a buy-sell agreement that if I got hit by the Chicken Delight truck, that he would have first right of refusal to take over the company.
Okay.
And then when my son Drew came into the firm, I redid the buy-sell agreement to include him. But in both cases, these folks were hand-selected to replace me when I finally retired. So mentally, I was already prepared for that transition moment.
So that highlights one of the first major principles about doing this well, and that is it's a function of preparation. It's about having a mindset now about what is yet to come. I'm curious if Rainey in his typology there, whatever that was, does he say that everybody goes through it, or do most people not go all the way to becoming a patriarch, or what's...
Well, we all will be boys, and we all will be teenagers, and we will all eventually become at least biologically men if we're males. But becoming a leader and becoming a patriarch, those things tend to require much more intentionality.
Okay.
And in many cases, he's observing what happens when people leave the business world or the industrial world as leaders, not ever transitioning to the patriarch, and it leaves a huge void in our Christian community.
Interesting.
There's a place for leaders who are growing older to transition to be patriarchs.
Right.
And in my role now as a troop master of a trail life troop, my role is one where I am constantly massaging, where I'm leaving the troop master to become more of a patriarch. So I'm equipping the younger fathers to take over for me at some point in the future. That's the whole reason for me doing this. And I'm finding that if you embrace it instead of fight it, you're cutting with a natural order of the universe, and it's much easier to do. Our egos a lot of time make it difficult for us to transition from being a leader to being a patriarch because we don't want anybody else calling the shots.
Okay.
In fact, the last couple of years in my company, my associates who eventually bought me out, they had some really good ideas. And if I remove myself out of my body and have this out-of-body experience and hover over and watch what was going on, the only reason I was doing it was because of ego. They had good ideas. I just didn't want to do anything different. I had already been set in my ways. But the reality is they had really good ideas that they're implementing right now with great effect. So I have to intentionally transition from being a leader to being a patriarch. And once I realized that it was important to do so, I started doing it.
What's your sense of where that transition aligns with retirement itself? So do you retire while you're still a leader, or do you retire after you've largely shifted into the thinking of a patriarch? What are your thoughts about that?
I think that you have the end in mind with whatever you're planning for your life. When I was a financial advisor, we had what we call the Wealth Builders milestones, where milestone number one was accumulate $1,000. Once you accumulate $1,000, the next thing was you pay off all your consumer debt, all your credit cards, your student loans, anything that's not backed by a mortgage. Then you save 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses. Then you save up to buy a house. Then you invest 15% of your income.
Okay.
Then you make accelerated payments against your mortgage, and then you expand your investment portfolio to include maybe a small business, or you buy rental real estate, or you invest in a little more sophisticated stock portfolios. But the final milestone is you get to the point where your investments provide you enough income that the only reason you're working is because you choose to work, not because you have to work. Now, I don't think it's biblically mandated for anybody to retire.
That's not a biblical category.
No. But for many of us, we think that once we stop making money, we're done being productive.
Mm-hmm.
But the last milestone of those wealth builders milestones is to create ministries and create jobs for others. There's a lot of projects around my property, and as I told you, I'm not allowed in a tool shed without adult supervision. So I've hired contractors with the sole purpose of, if I hire you, I have to be your right-hand man. I have to go get the
You're
tools
going to
from the
apprentice
truck.
me?
Exactly.
Okay.
So in one, I'm learning some of the skills that they're already good at. But secondly, as I get to speak truth into their lives, I get to ask them questions about how are things going at home and what's going on in your world and how are your finances and you got any debt? And I get to talk to them.
Several levels.
Yes. And so in my walk through those financial milestones, I knew eventually I'd get to the point where I was creating ministries and creating jobs. And that's kind of my place right now.
That sounds like a very fulfilling and highly purposeful kind of endeavor.
For those of us who believe in God, and we believe that He is the creator of the universe, we believe that there is some intentionality in His natural order.
Yes.
If God is a loving God, and He wants us to do the things that are good, we're going to flourish when we are cutting with the natural grain of His natural order. So by doing these sorts of things, I can feel God's pleasure.
Mm-hmm. That's actually going to be a conversation for us to have at another time about that human flourishing and kind of aligning ourselves with the way creation has been made. But I want to bring us back down to the specifics of retirement. So you're describing a process that you have gone through that you kind of created for yourself, but you've used the wisdom of others, obviously, so that you're intentional and you're thinking now about what is to come and not what's coming maybe next week.
Right.
That could be part of it, but what's coming 2 years, 5 years further up the line than that. And I think, again, that's going to be one of the things that's going to be a significant factor in how a person goes through this transition into retirement. If they have planned well, then it should probably go better. But part of planning well, as you're talking about, is what are you going to do with that time? Now, there are some other considerations here. A person who is, 67 years old or 61 years old, not really officially ready to retire, but all of a sudden their company says, thank you very much, we don't need you anymore, and you're dismissed. That's going to be a different transition experience than a person who's got 3, 5, 10 years and they know that, when they retire from this company, they're going to have a pension or this kind of a thing. So one of the things that's going to be significant is that transition a sudden and unanticipated event, which is probably going to be a lot harder, or is it going to be a gradual and planned, anticipated transition? Because if that's the case, again, I think they're generally going to do better than that. That's also part of the process. Is it sudden? Is it gradual? Is it anticipated? Is it not anticipated? And then another question that's going to be significant in how well the transition goes is how large of a change is being made. That person who is dismissed from a job before they were ready to leave may have major crises all over the place because, well, I'm not going to be able to finish maybe paying off my mortgage, or I'm not ready. I don't have the financial resources I thought I needed to have, and so that precipitates relational crises, financial crises. That's all negative, and those are huge. But there are people who also do the positive thing. Okay, I'm retired, so I'm divorcing my spouse. Tired of them anyway. I'm selling this house. I'm buying the Corvette. I'm moving to who knows where, Tahiti, uprooting my entire life. Again, those are massive changes that people sometimes choose to make, maybe not very wisely, but they make those decisions, and they're going to have super huge repercussions for them and then every other stakeholder in their lives. So I think what I'm hoping we'll be able to do for the viewers and the listeners is to help them get a good picture of how to do this transition well.
Years ago, I read a book called Favorite Son. It's a book about the son of Chesty Puller. Chesty Puller was a lieutenant general in the Marine Corps who was a legend. He had earned 5 Navy crosses, fighting in the Banana Wars in the 1920s. He'd been through World War II. He had been through Korea. He was been the commander of the 1st Marine Division. He was at the Chosin Reservoir, which was an incredibly horrific battle. But the book's about his son. And his son, following his father's footsteps, joins the Marine Corps, goes into the infantry, takes over an infantry platoon, goes to Vietnam, and within a few weeks, he gets both of his legs blown off.
Wow.
And how he struggled to find his way. The book's not about Bob Carey, but for me, there's a chapter in there which really illustrates what we're talking about right now. As this younger Puller is recovering in a military hospital just outside of Washington, D.C., guess who else is there? It's Bob Carey. Bob Carey, who was senator for Nebraska for many, many years.
Oh, other one.
That was John Carey.
John Carey.
Totally different.
Yep.
Totally different.
Yep.
But Bob Carey was a Navy SEAL in Vietnam, and he lost a leg stepping on a booby trap. While he was recovering in the same hospital as the younger Puller, he's a cut up. He's always playing tricks on the nurses. He's like falsifying documents. He's telling jokes, and he would do things like when they would have to do stool samples, he would take jelly beans and stick them in the stools. So this is the kind of thing he was. But the day he got discharged from the Navy, he started walking away, and somebody asked him, says, "Well, Bob, what are you going to do now?" And he goes, "I'm going to get on with my life." And if you know Bob Carey, he ended up being a very, very successful businessman in Nebraska and ended up becoming one of their senators. Never did he think that losing a leg was going to have a major negative impact on his life. He is already determined that if I can't do A, then I'll just go do B or C. And I think that for many of us, while we're still healthy, while our relationships are still strong, while everybody in our family is doing fine, we need to prepare ourselves for those sorts of involuntary transitions. That we face them going, if I can't do A, then I'm going to be really, really, really good at being B. So I took quite a bit of what's what we're looking for here?
Counsel.
Yes, wise counsel from his the way he handled his affliction. In my case, I had the luxury of being able to come up and plan for retirement, and then actually just follow the plan. One of the things I learned in leadership is that there's 2 types of leaders. There are product leaders and there are process leaders. So let's say, for example, you take over a nonprofit. Let's say that you're responsible for running a after-school program for kids. The process person says, okay, Monday through Friday, while schools are open, we have to come up with a program for these kids. Well, what are we going to fill Monday with? And what are we going to fill Tuesday with? And what are we going to fill Wednesday with? It can be daunting to try to figure out how you're going to fill in all that time on the schedule if you're a process leader. A product leader, on the other hand, says, at the end of this school year, these kids who are part of my charge will be able to do A, B, and C. And what you'll find is you don't have enough time to do it. You're going, oh my gosh, I've only got an hour in the afternoon, 5 days a week. How am I going to teach these kids how to give more than they take from their community? So by borrowing that analogy from leadership into retirement, some of the things that I do is I say, I'm going to play guitar an hour a day. I'm going to listen to 5 lectures a month. I'm going to do 20,000 burpees in 2024. I'm going to read 2 books a month. I'm going to have lunch with 2 friends a week. And I have all these different things. And what you find, I don't have time to do them all. But I'm not bored.
I have heard many people who do retirement well talk about how they can't imagine how they had time for a job before.
Right.
Because they are so busy. You're describing a mindset of having identified targets to continually hit on an ongoing basis. Jobs usually provide that to some degree for most people who work. Mm-hmm. Except for the occasional person whose job is much more creative and spontaneous. Most people, they have a job, here are your responsibilities, things you're supposed to do, here are the timetables, and that structures their lives. That in a lot of ways makes life, even if it's difficult, it's easier because I at least know what's expected of me, and I'm going to be doing this for these weeks, months, years, et cetera, et cetera. One of the struggles about retirement is people's structure has been removed from them. They may be thankful for that, but as you're saying, they don't know what to replace it with. And so there's the temptation, you were saying earlier about moving into this patriarch position where you mentor and you build ministry and jobs and things like that. You're investing back into the world. I think in the American model of retirement, there is sort of a go back to being an adolescent. Mm-hmm. You can sleep in, you can go have fun, go do this, go do that, whatever. What I think is interesting, and I've seen this in some of the people that I've worked with over the years, is, yeah, I'm retired, great, terrific. I don't have to go to work Monday. Fabulous. And so that week, maybe a couple of weeks, maybe even a month or two, it's awesome. I don't have to answer to anybody. I can do whatever I want. And then, why am I struggling? They start to struggle for a lot of reasons. But where I want to focus right now is my sense of identity has changed because I was a fill-in-the-blank software engineer, truck driver, whatever it was, that gave me my sense of identity. Psychologist Erik Erikson, back in the mid-20th century, proposed a lifespan developmental theory for the identity of individuals. And the last 2 stages have salience for what we're talking about today. And they're basically middle and late adulthood stages. Most of his stages were in early life, so the first 5 went through 20. So the last 2 or 3 are the remainder of life. So he's looking at a lot of kids. Mm-hmm. That's okay. His point, though, and I think it's a good one, is that in these last 2 stages, the second to the last is called generativity versus stagnation. So the identity of a person is built around either the accomplishment or the failure to accomplish the task of generativity. Generativity is being productive. Generativity is making life go. I'm supporting myself. I'm supporting my family. Hopefully I'm doing something that actually I feel contributes to the world. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's as simple as I need a job. Mm-hmm. But that's what generativity is. Stagnation is the opposite of that, not necessarily being unemployed, but finding incredible dissatisfaction in what one is doing and then, living for the weekend and some of the more destructive kinds of things that you see people who should know better because they're older than that are still doing. So that's the generativity piece. They have structure given to them by their job, and their identity then flows from that. Then the last category, the last developmental stage is this integrity versus despair. Because now you realize the vast majority of your life is in the rearview mirror, and you do look back, and you go, have I done well? And do I feel good about the life that I've led, the things that I've done with my life? And then the last piece of that is I'm not done, like out, but like it's what you're talking about with this patriarch idea. What do I still want to do that lines up with who I am and who I want to be? If I have only been a software engineer or a truck driver, and now I'm retiring and I don't have something to build myself around, I'm really going to struggle. And the temptation is going to be, I guess nothing wrong with playing golf, just don't want to offend anybody, but I think I'm just going to go play golf and I'm going to go travel and I'm going to go to be a foodie and I'm going to, attend all the Rangers games, and nothing wrong with that as a part of the retired life, but I seriously doubt that that's the best.
In my observations, the people that struggle in that area have never really determined who they are. nobody was ever just a software engineer. They were
Right.
created for something more than that.
Right.
Just finished a book called Dumbing Us Down, and it's essentially a very, very critical look at American education.
Okay.
And the author talks about how since the Industrial Revolution, our public school system has been institutionalizing people where kids really don't have a whole lot of time to themselves to reflect
Or to be kids.
or to be kids. They don't do a whole lot of problem solving because everybody kind of runs interference for them. Well, you graduate from high school, you go to college, institutionalized, you go to work,
There's
institutionalized.
that structure.
And then all of a sudden, hey, Mark, you can do whatever you want. Well, I don't know what I want to do. Well, you do it. What do you want to do? I never thought about it before.
Right.
Bob Brown, who was the most junior state senator in Montana, used to be on our Kiwanis Club. And he was part of a group that went over to the Soviet Union when it fell apart in the 1990s. And their job was to try to teach people democracy in the old Soviet Union.
That would have been quite a task.
It was a task because entire generations had never had freedom before. So they're going, start a business.
They literally didn't know how to think.
I don't know how.
Right.
Do whatever you want. Read whatever books you want. I don't know what books I should be reading. They never had that kind of freedom.
Right.
Personally, I have always been iconically American of the Tocquevillian persuasion. And what I mean by that is that Tocqueville was a French aristocrat who came and checked out the United States in the 1830s.
1830s. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he's out on the frontier. Now, the frontier in those days was Ohio and Kentucky, right?
Right.
But what he's noticing is that the people on the frontier, they were problem solvers. If there was a ditch that needed to be dug, well, they just dug the ditch.
Right.
And if they needed to get a school marm to teach their kids, well, they'd get a school marm. If they needed a volunteer fire department, they just kind of figured it out.
They had an organic societal chemistry.
Exactly.
That was a mindset, but it was a shared mindset that allowed us to work in a cohesive and collaborative way that we couldn't imagine today.
That's right. If people are going to have a good retirement, they have to think like a frontiersman in Tocquevillian America. And that is that I have some say in what my retirement is going to look like. And rather than just sit around and wait for somebody to invent a new identity for you, you need to find the identity that's already present inside of you. Mm-hmm. God created people for a certain reason. Now, I've worked with many military officers who were transitioning from the military to becoming
regular
people,
yeah.
Civilians. And the military does a fantastic job of institutionalizing people. They make them think that once you retire, there's nothing of value that you can give to society. You know, if you're a general, you can be a consultant or you go work for the Rand Corporation. But almost everybody wants to become a cop or they want to get into some sort of law enforcement because that's what they did
There's
in the military.
There's a superstructure that's readily available in that kind of a context.
But they also, the skills that they learn, or if they're logisticians in the military, then they want to become logisticians when they get out.
Mm-hmm.
And I always tell them 2 years before they retire, I go, I want you to start taking a couple hours on the weekend to start fantasizing about what you would do if you weren't in the military. Would you like to teach high school history? Would you want to drive an excavator? Would you want to go back and become a nurse? Mm-hmm. Because you now have the freedom to do all the things you fantasized about while you were stuck in the job that you were doing for the last 20 years. Once you figure out that you have other options, then you start thinking, okay, what are the gifts that I give away for free? So in my case, I have lots and lots of opinions and I'm willing to give advice. So I just had to learn how to monetize that. Well, now I can give it away for free again because I don't need the income. Mm-hmm. I have a good friend of mine. Every time he comes to my house, he finds something wrong with the house. Not in a negative way, but he goes, "Hey Joe, how long has that faucet been leaking?" I didn't even notice that it was. So he goes out to his truck and he comes and he has a couple of washers and he fixes the faucet and now it's great. And then as he's walking out, he goes, "Your doorknob is loose." So he gets a screwdriver and he in retirement, that's the kind of stuff he does. He helps people fix things around the house. Mm-hmm. So he made a living doing that for years and years, but now he does it because that's what he was created to do. So in retirement, sit back and think about, when I give away gifts, what do I give away for free? And then just cut with the natural grain for what you were created to do.
That's a pretty life-giving perspective, I think.
You remember the movie Chariots of Fire, where Eric Little he's talking to his sister, and his sister is saying, "What are you doing running this nonsense? You need to be doing spreading the gospel."
Right. When I run.
And hey, I can feel God's
His
pleasure.
Yes.
Exactly.
I really doubt a lot of people get there, at least if they're living according to the kind of American standard operating manual. And I don't want to, beat up on our culture too much, but it does deserve a fair amount of beating.
And it's one of the three things you can talk about in the show.
Exactly. Exactly. But going back to the idea of the specific components of moving through the transition well, and then retiring well, and feeling a sense of purpose and the identity that maybe was there when you were 25. It's gotten tweaked because obviously life does what it does, and we grow and mature, hopefully. There is this idea that wisdom should come with age. Sometimes age just comes by itself, which is unfortunate. But our identity that God is forging in us remains the same, generally speaking, over the course of our lives. So like you said, if this guy made his living by fixing things, maybe he's going to continue to fix things in his retirement, because his identity is what's driving him. It's not the structure of it so much. But again, he has targets that he, in his mind anyway, he wants to hit. Who can I help today? What relationships do I have with people where I can use the gifting that I have and pursue the interests that I have that benefit other people where they need it.
Like a lot of the military folks that I was talking about earlier, in their minds, they believe this lie that's not true. And the lie is that once you leave the military, you have nothing to offer of value. I think people who are facing retirement need to overcome that lie first. The fact is that just by virtue of your age and experience, you do have value. The question is how are you going to share it? And you can start very, very little. Is that I can tell you right now, every school in somebody's community needs somebody to be a reader coach, where you go into the first grade or the second grade and you go out in the hallway with a kid and all they do is read to you and you just listen to them read to you. And then when they stumble on a word, you help them with the word. I've known many folks who have done that and they just love it. They're more excited about doing that than they ever did working while they were still working. If you go to our church, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting a retired fella who's doing something at the church.
That's exciting.
They're fixing the lights. They're doing the landscaping. They're delivering wood to some shut-in out there in Kyla or Marion, which is places that are mountain town.
A little bit of a distance from the church, right?
But they're doing things, and if they do it twice, that means the first time it was not horrible. That they must have gotten some benefit for doing it.
Right.
That's why they keep coming back and doing it. So you have to believe you have value, and then you have to figure out, how do I actually express that value?
That's for a certain group in society, and you highlighted military veterans who've been told that you don't have anything to offer. Part of the reason for that, obviously, is in the military conformity.
Let me stop you there, Mark. I'm not so sure they're told that. I think they just believe that. I don't think they go to a classroom and say, "Oh, gentlemen,
I don't think that's the case. I do think it's a byproduct, though, of what's necessary to be successful in the military. You will follow the orders, you will know where things need to be, and you will do what is asked of you, and you don't ask a bunch of questions. So to be successful, as the military needs people to be successful, to be a unit that's cohesive and effective, it works against some of those how am I thinking as an individual kinds of things. You can get funneled into a mentality that says, all I know is being a Marine or a Navy person, whatever. There's a whole other group of people, though, that I have much more concerns about than the person who says, do I have value? It's the person who comes out of retirement and says, now it's my turn. Now I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to indulge me. And that goes back to that adolescent mindset that shows up when someone who's 60 or 70 years old, and they're not looking to invest in others or to do anything for other people or to mentor or to be a patriarch. They're looking to just play and have fun. I don't think that actually helps them do very well either.
Well, you could probably speak to that because in your line of work, you see a lot of folks who are struggling.
Yes.
And as we were talking on the drive up, that there's a spectrum in the population. There are those folks who are really struggling and having a difficult time, and their purpose for watching a podcast like this is, I don't want to be feeling this horrible anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The next group are those folks who go, just give me a little bit of gas to get me to the next town.
Mm-hmm.
Is it, what do I have to do just to get through the next 25 years that I'm going to experience in retirement?
Mm-hmm.
And for those folks, they're just trying to, they fill it with golf, or they fill it with bridge club, or they fill it with watching Fox News and having lunch with their cronies and bad-mouthing America. But then there's another group, and maybe this is an elite group. Maybe it's a small part of the whole spectrum. And there are folks who want to retire well.
Yes.
And they want to be flourishing, and they want to be firing on all pistons. That's where I want to be.
And that's where you are. I mean, everything you've described is exemplary in that direction. You're the definition of a producer or a contributor, but we're in a society that is all about consumption and taking.
In God's created universe, there's a paradox, and that is that being happy is the goal.
Right.
But it's a horrible, horrible goal, which will actually take you away from flourishing.
Correct.
The Greeks use the term eudaimonia, and eudaimonia sometimes is loosely translated into happiness. It's not. It's optimal living. Mm-hmm. It is living at the most excellent way possible. Mm-hmm. So if 100% is the best you can be, how do I live at the 100% positive best that I can possibly live? That's eudaimonia. Mm-hmm. In order to do that, you have to do things with a certain amount of intentionality.
Yeah.
And in my case, I tend to use what's called the SPRIF model.
Talk about that, because I've heard you talk about that before, and it's a pretty compelling way of thinking.
The SPRIF model is based on having habits towards your spirituality, your physical fitness and health, your relationships, your intellectual growth, and your financial stewardship. For example, for spirituality, I take Rick Warren's book From the Purpose-Driven Life, and he talks about that when God created us, he created us with 5 purposes in mind. One of them was worship. Now, when we use the term worship, we're not talking about singing in church. What we're talking about is Eric Little's form of worship. That when I do that which God created me to do, I feel his pleasure.
That's an act of worship.
That is an act of worship.
It's a life of worship, even.
If you're a healer and you heal people, you're going to feel God's pleasure. If you're a crisis manager, you're the guy who comes in and he can make everything kind of soothe everybody's feathers and calm things down. You're a peacemaker, and when you peacemake, you will feel God's pleasure. That's a form of worship. Mm-hmm. Another form of a spiritual habit is to be in fellowship with other believers. Like when you and I have lunch and we get together and we talk about important things. That's a form of fellowship. I don't know about you, but me selfishly, I get a lot out of our meetings together.
Me too.
Another thing is discipleship. And discipleship is if you're here and the Christ model of what we want to be is up here, discipleship is moving down the path to be a little bit more like Christ than I was yesterday. Mm-hmm. Fourth thing, and this is where we talk about retirement, is that Rick Warren suggests that each and every one of us should be ministers. We should be ministering to people in one way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. So whether it's teaching or healing or helping, there are ways that everybody should have some leadership which cuts in the natural grain of what they were created to do. And then finally, we should have mission work where we're out there sharing the gospel and evangelizing and saying, you know what? I'm really, really happy. And here's why I'm happy. It's because I know that my eternity is secure. If I'm still alive and there's one person out there who hasn't heard about Christ, then I have a reason to get up tomorrow and get out of bed and go tell them about it.
Correct.
There's a lot of things you can do. And my son and Tom, his associate, who bought my business, one of the challenges that they have now that I did not have the last 10 years I had in the business, they don't have any gray hair. So they
Drew's got a little.
Drew has a little. But I'm telling you that in a lot of industries, gray hair is something to be proud of.
Yes.
It's something that you don't have to run away from. People will look for the contractor who's 58 years old instead of the contractor who's 22 years old.
Yes.
Just take that and use it as an analogy for what retirement is. Just go out and demonstrate that experience to the rest of the world. But in terms of the SPRIF model, what you do is you sit down on a Friday afternoon, you take 2 hours and you mark off your calendar. I'm doing SPRIF planning for the next year. Said, what will be my spiritual habits? What will be my physical fitness and health habits? What are going to be my relationship building habits?
Yep.
My intellectual growth. How am I going to be more intelligent tomorrow than I am today?
Right.
Figure out what you're going to do. And then financial stewardship is that we're all stewards of God's possessions.
Right.
How are we going to steward them well?
So what you're highlighting over again is the importance of targets. Having targets that you identify and then you go after with great intentionality. So for the person who's going to, so some of the people watching this are going to be people who are maybe a ways away from retirement. And good, you got time. But being intentional now and setting a trajectory now, whether your retirement is 10 years or whether retirement is 40 years. And I hope, again, we're clear that retirement is not about, I don't have to work anymore. It's about a shift of one's focus, perhaps, from earning a living to continuing meaningful activity that blesses the world and themselves. But having a long trajectory, or as long as possible, thinking in advance, and then what are the financial targets I need to set now? I'm 30 years old. If I want to retire when I'm 55, what are those targets going to be? So the importance of an intentional long trajectory, I think the SPRIF model is a terrific template for people to make use of just starting now on an ongoing basis. I would say even that some of that can be done in collaboration with a spouse. Because, one of the things that I do see, and it's unfortunate, is people afraid to retire. Or they retire and where do they go? Somewhere else. Why? Because I don't want to be around this person now that I'm not going to my office anymore. In fact, I have seen people who are really scared to death of retiring because of what they are likely now going to have to be addressing that work kept them away from. I mean, literally, guy gets up in the morning at 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock. He's out the door by 6:30 before the kids are even awake, and he's not home until 9 o'clock at night because he's working to take care of the family, and he hasn't really been a family man. And at some point that ends, and the chickens might have to be accounted for as they come back to roost. There's a lot of people who are not well prepared for that. And this, I think, goes back to your point of having a target. What kind of relationship do you want to have with your spouse when you retire? Don't wait till you get to retirement to start creating that relationship.
Correct. Well, that's why R is part of SPRIF.
Right.
Is that there has to be some intentionality of what that's going to look like. So how do you incorporate your spouse into your SPRIF model? And you do that by having conversations about just those sorts of things.
What do you think about having a SPRIF model for the couple?
I think it's a great idea.
Have you you write stuff. Have you written here's a SPRIF model for a couple, or is it easily adapted for an individual as a couple?
I've never done it for for a couple, but now that you've mentioned it, I probably should.
It'll be done probably by tomorrow.
When I have done SPRIF classes, I've done it in terms of writing a personal mission statement. In fact, on my phone, I actually have my mission statement that I take a look at every year between Christmas and New Year's. So you have that time where you got to grab a couple hours between Christmas and New Year's, and what would be my mission statement for the next year? What am I going to do? But in the classes where I teach mission statements, I have ideas and guidelines for people who are between the ages of 20 and 30, people between the ages of 30 and 40, people who are 50 to 65, and then people after age 65. Because your mission statement should be dynamic. It should change with what you are. So when you're young, you might say, I'm going to be the best man I can possibly be for the purpose of attracting the best wife I can find. But once you're married, you don't have to. That's no longer your part of your mission statement.
Well, you still want to be the best man you can be, but it's not.
You're not searching.
You're not looking. You're not on the hunt. Exactly.
But there's saving for retirement. By the time you're 65, you either did or didn't.
Yeah.
So that's no longer part of your mission statement.
Right.
But being a patriarch would be. Some of the things for retired people that I say that you need to be working on is that one, learn to simplify. Is that it's not necessary for you to have a complicated life in retirement. Little things is if you take a look at the cupboards in your house and they're just filled with the plastic containers that are so irritating that to get to the plastic container you want, you have to go through 5 that you don't want. Maybe just take all those out and only put the ones back that you've used in the last 2 years.
You've been in my cupboard recently, like this morning when I was unloading the dishwasher.
But there's no need to be complicated in retirement. You can choose to be simpler.
In fact, that's probably more than just a choice. I think there's wisdom in doing that.
Yeah.
Because hopefully as we age and become more wise and we know ourselves better, we are going to be better at creating realistic targets. I don't know that I'm going to be looking at 20,000 burpees. Maybe 5, 10, 20 years ago. But what can I do? What are the realistic expectations I can set for myself?
I'll walk 20 miles a week.
Yeah.
Not
Not all at one time.
No.
Exactly, but that's my point.
Right.
So yeah, you work within the parameters of realistic attainment.
Right.
And I think that's where a lot of people, as they face retirement, they aren't thinking that very much. I am going to now be able to, go back like I was 20 or 25 and embrace this new career. I mean, you've been learning to play musical instruments, which that to me, again, that's a terrific example of what somebody does who is still alive and dynamic and seeking to grow. I mean, you've been talking about on the drive up. You were talking about, I think it was the drive up. You're talking about an Aristotle.
Yeah.
Aristotle. I can't say it. Kind of the idea of beauty, functionality, aesthetics, that kind of a thing, and embracing that. I think that's remarkable.
Another thing that people can shoot for in retirement is try to pursue things that are beautiful, things that are true, and things that are truth, beauty, and what's the fourth one?
Good.
Gosh,
Isn't
age.
it goodness?
And goodness, yes, yeah. Exactly. Yes.
Aristotelian.
Yes.
I said it. There.
But write them down. In my case, I spent a lifetime as an adult avoiding art because I didn't think I was good at it. So I'm never going to be a great singer. I'm never going to be a great guitar player. So I'm not going to take it up. And finally I said, I don't care what anybody thinks.
But right there, what you just said, that is so huge. And this is especially true, in my opinion, for men more than women, although women are certainly catching up. Men have a mentality that if I'm not good at something, I'm not going to do it at all.
Or if I'm not the best at it.
Exactly. And so they'll cut it right out of the menu.
Right.
And that's really unfortunate.
And reading C.S. Lewis and G.K. Chesterton, both of them talk about the importance of beauty.
Yes.
That you need to pursue that. I never did it until they told me to. And then when they told me to, I started to go, wow. And one of the things that I've done recently is I can now draw cartoons.
Huh.
So Dilbert
One more
and
thing
Bart
that's
Simpson.
It's in your range of options.
Now, 2 years ago I couldn't,
Mm-hmm.
but getting on YouTube and on my excellence list things to do, I go,
Yep.
I'm going to draw cartoons 90 minutes a week. So when I'm waiting on hold on the phone and I'm just killing time,
Yep.
I'll turn on a YouTube video and I'll try to draw a cartoon dinosaur. And I have a bunch of used paper that I'm going to throw away, and I make these drawings. And then when my 4-year-old granddaughter comes over to spend the day, she can color them.
Yep. That's terrific.
But I was always intimidated because I wasn't the best at it. But the reality is that you spend 100 hours doing anything, and
You're
you move from
you're
being
gonna get better.
Yes, but you don't have to be in the top 1%.
Nope.
But you will, just by doing it, will move yourself in the top 10%.
Yes. Well, and you said something a minute ago that I want to highlight, which is we can be subject to what we think other people are thinking.
Yep.
Or their opinions of us. And really, especially as believers, the only opinion that matters is God's.
Yeah.
And he does not evaluate us. You're not that good of an artist, so Joe, you should stop it. You make a joyful noise. Well, being in church, some people really do make a joyful noise.
Right.
And God welcomes that because he knows the heart.
Right.
And so what we're trying to do as believers, whether it's in retirement or any other phase of life, is to please the audience of one, as the song goes. So
here's another thing I think that people who are approaching retirement need to consider, and that is that you need to put your good attitude on every day when you leave the house.
Oh, what a great idea.
And the reason I say that is that I spent 30 years in the financial advisory world where I saw, and most of the clients I had were retired. They're the only people with any money. Some of them were incredibly happy and some of them were very dour. And what I found is that those people who habitually became dour, when they retired, they become incredibly unhappy because nobody wants to be around them. So 2 things that I've noticed that if you want to have a successful retirement is that try to make people smile whenever they meet you. So when you're at the store and make a little joke, ask them questions about who they are. At first, some people will think it's kind of creepy because we live in a society where nobody wants to get that close.
Yeah.
But most of the time, people are going to enjoy it. When I was in the hotel in Baltimore at a funeral last week, and I'm talking to the clerk at the hotel, and she goes, "How you doing today, sir?" I said, "I'm having the best day of my life." She goes, "Why is that?" And I said, "Because I just met you." And then she started laughing.
Right.
And I go, "I scored."
Yes.
I got her to smile.
You did. And you could also get arrested, just in case that was taken the wrong way. But what you're describing, though, is this embracing of life that should be descriptive of us as Christians for sure. And I would say that retirement is another opportunity for our character and our priorities to be revealed and fine-tuned and focused or refocused. Because again, these transitions that we go through are natural opportunities to take stock, where we've been, where are we now, where are we going, and how are we going to get there. And I think that retirement is that last major phase. We can talk about end of life issues where are you prepared for your own mortality? I think if you have lived that trajectory well and you've hit targets, you will be prepared for your mortality in the sense of my life has been lived well. I haven't left things undone, or at least not very many things undone. And I think that's just a beautiful testimony. That's a life.
It is, but it's a paradox. And what I mean by that is that we should fill our lives with good, beautiful, and true things. And then what will happen is that the byproduct, not the goal, but the byproduct is you look back in your life and going, wow, I lived with no regrets.
Yes, precisely.
Yeah.
Because the person who is approaching the end of their life and what they're seeing is much more of what they didn't do and what they did badly and what they didn't get to do and things of that nature, they are really, really going to struggle.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate.
Here's another thing I think people should consider in retirement, and that is that focus on not being a burden on other people. And Here's a couple of physical ways where that happens. Is that there's a point where you bought a 5-bedroom house when you had 4 kids, they're all growing up, and now you're having difficulty keeping the yard up and you're having difficulty keeping the place clean, but you're not going to sell that house because you're thinking that at some point, all 4 of your kids with their entire extended family are all going to come at the same time and visit you
For Christmas.
for Christmas. It's not going to happen.
So you need that space. You don't need that space.
But then what happens is that your kids feel obligated to come and cut your grass, and now they're using their vacation time to come clean the house, and they're helping you live this fantasy that's never going to happen, and it's an undue burden on other people. Think ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Think ahead, and by simplifying, try to be as low maintenance as you possibly can for other people.
I think for some people that's a pretty counterintuitive idea, because it's almost like I've done all of these things for you in your life, and now it's your turn to kind of pay it back to me a little bit. I don't think that's a particularly good way to go, especially if there is a sense of obligation versus a want to on the part of the younger generation.
We were talking about Aristotle in the car, and one of the things that Aristotle said is that virtues are habits that we do so often that when we don't do them, we feel out of sorts.
Correct. Yes.
And one of the things that we teach our trail life boys is that you need to organize your life in such a way that you give more than you take from every relationship.
Boy, is that countercultural.
It is. But remember we talked about that population? And this is the elite population where people are firing all pistons and really feeling God's pleasure. You got to do things that are counterintuitive.
Correct. Yes, you do. If you just do what everybody else is doing, you're going to probably end up pretty much in the same place.
That's right.
And a lot of those folks are in my office, and they're, like you said at the beginning, they're just trying to get away from something that doesn't feel good versus trying to go towards something. And that I think maybe that's a good way to wrap this up. Retirement is going to be done best if you're retiring toward something or some things versus trying to get away from or retiring away from that which you want to leave.
It's amazing, Mark, that once you retire and you don't need a paycheck, you are liberated to pursue all of those spriff things.
Yeah.
You can now pursue the relationships you never had time for before. Now it's kind of like the cat's in the cradle. All those relationships you want, now you're talking to your kids and going, hey, you want to get together for lunch? And they go, Dad, I'd love to.
I gotta work. Right. I can't. Right.
But they can feel your desire.
Yes. And you continue to invest. You leave a legacy. These are the things I think that really make life rich.
They're not the goal. It's the byproduct.
The byproducts of living with the goal.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being here today, folks. Hopefully this has been useful for you.